And the very first meeting, Donna and I and Louise just got together ourselves and said, boy, we should do something historical because we thought we should do something. And so then we planned a meeting, invited people, got a good turnout into Louise's house, and did that for several months, once a month speaker. And then we got such big crowds we had to move to the Cushing Community Center. And then we, when 2005, the Sterling Township was 150 years old, so we had a big year of celebrating that. And we built our first museum. We actually moved into the back of Vern's Market down in Cushing, in the unused area. And we're there for a couple of years until he closed. And then we moved to a couple of rooms in the upstairs of the Cushing Community Center. So we have had a museum since about 2005, I'd say. And our society is, we officially became a official society about 2005 also. We had been informal before, and now we're a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you got your checkbook, we're fully deductible for your activities. So anyway, so we're our museum, by the way, is open every Monday, 10 to 2 year-round, unless there's a bad snowstorm. It's in Cushing, the upstairs of the community center. It's a back entrance. If you get lost driving through Cushing, well, we're on top of the hill. We're on top of the hill. But, okay, so what I'm going to do. Oh, as part of that 2005 Sterling history, we did a weekly newspaper column in the Indian County Leader talking about local history. Uh-oh.
I didn't report.
The projector turned itself off.
Uh-oh.
Let's try it.
Oh, it's unplugged there.
It's unplugged. Oh. Donna. Here, this one here, Donna. Right here. We need to plug in. We need to plug in.
Funny how that works.
So,
It's also one way of just shutting it all down.
All right. I think this is probably not too serious. Now we just have to turn it back on and let it warm up. But yeah, it'll get going here pretty quick, baby. You have to turn it on once and then turn it on again to make sure it knows you mean business.
I saw a flicker. Yep, something's happening.
So anyway, we did this weekly newspaper in the Leader about the history of Sterling, and we call it Sterling 150th. And we got all sorts of people from Sterling to tell us about their history, their family history, or different places and that. And at the end of the year, and I was the guy who kind of hosted that column, put it together and everything. And at the end of the year, having gotten almost famous by having my name on a column every week in the newspaper, where's our newspaper person?
Right
Oh,
there.
right there, okay. This is Sarah from the Leader. But anyway, the newspaper makes you famous pretty quick. And so they said, well, why don't you continue the newspaper column on local history and stuff? And so I renamed it River Road Ramblings, and decided that I would keep writing stuff on the paper, on the stuff. And so anyway, I gathered a lot of information on the River Road and the area around it. And so we're going to look a little bit at the River Road. I got to get my...
And then you turned all those articles into a book.
Oh, and many books, yeah.
Many books.
Yeah.
By
Okay.
the way, are available.
And where can we find them?
At the Fishing Museum. Okay, so this is called a, Brad, you need to get over here. You can't see anything.
I'm just listening.
No, Brad, give it, here, bring a chair over here and come over.
Yeah, there's a chair right
I
here.
feel embarrassed if everybody can't. You guys, maybe you better move down a little bit.
Assume the River Road was the road before the...
Yeah, okay, so the River, okay, in 1837, the federal government signed a deal with the Indians in 1837 that they could cut off the trees, white pines mainly, they wanted, in the St. Croix River Valley, and actually a lot of northern Wisconsin and Minnesota and that. This is before I was a state or anything. And so that's when people started coming in here, because in 1837, you could cut trees and float them down the river, and it was a long siege of doing that. But a little earlier than that, the River Road followed the river up from St. Croix Falls, close up Wolf Creek, pretty close. And then it had two branches. One went out, following the river out into west, and then the other went on up towards Grantsburg and Clam Falls. And so right here was the dividing area where you choose your route. And if we look at the earliest things, on the left, each of those markers, this is a map you can look at on the internet, by the way, but each of these markers has something behind it. So since the first thing we know was here, this road followed an Indian trail. At Wolf Creek began 6 miles or a little more of rapids ending at the falls in St. Croix Falls, and so people had a difficult time going down those rapids and through the falls. So this was a sort of a end point right here before it got into a poorly navigable thing. You can, explorers did come up and down the river, but Ronnie Blair and I, when we were young men, we decided to canoe up from St. Croix Falls up to Never's Dam, or up here to Wolf Creek. And it was terrible. Sometimes you had to, even though the dam in St. Croix backed the water up, so it was a lot better than what the first voyagers and that had to do. We had to sometimes go over and get out of the canoe and drag it, and sometimes grab on brush on the side of the road, side of the river, just to get ourselves up in the current. So it was quite an obstacle for navigation. But so anyway, so the Indians had this trail that went around it down to St. Croix Falls, where you could get back in the river again. And so River Road really follows this old Indian trail, which we don't know how long it was there, but probably hundreds of years at least, maybe more. So the first thing we should look at is Indian presence on here. So on my list of things, I should have, let's try, how about the beginning of Wolf Creek? Okay, I'm in the wrong, let me see. I gotta go to the viewer mode, okay. So, at Wolf Creek, this guy, in 1831, the winter of 1831, oh, it didn't show up. I have to do this cast to show the name. This business of...
I think Rowan County in southwest
Yep,
Minnesota.
that's also named after him, but... right. I have to go here and say, cast the screen rather than the window. Okay, now let's see if that did it. No, there's a, when you pop up a window, we'll try one more time. Cast. All right. I don't know if he was worth all that work or not. There was a guy named Henry Schoolcraft who was down at Fort Snelling who was the Indian agent for this area, and Brown, who had been a soldier and then became a trader, wanted to put a trading post here at Wolf Creek. But Schoolcraft said no. The Sioux Indians or the Dakota Indians are on the south side of these falls and rapids, and the Chippewa are up here, and they don't get along. And if you put a trading post here, you're just going to have trouble. You're going to have people coming together, and they'll be fighting. So you can't have one. Well, then he went off. Schoolcraft went off to discover the sources of the Mississippi River, and left another guy in charge who was willing to take a bribe. And so Brown got his trading post up here for that winter, 31, fall of 31 through the winter of 32. And that's essentially Wolf Creek's start, and that was the first settlement here. After that,
18.
18, yeah, 18, but I'm kidding. 19 sounds a long time. Anyway, so that was the start of Wolf Creek. And then it didn't have a trading post for a few years, and then somebody else got in, and there was more traffic in here. So a guy named Livingston in about 1840 had a trading post on the out here, although it probably was not right here on Wolf Creek. It probably was closer to the St Croix River. If those of you who used to do snowmobiling here, there's a bridge across Wolf Creek somewhere down close to the river, and probably that was where it was. But anyway, so that was the 1840s, and that was still an Indian trading post. But by the 1837, when this treaty was done, people started coming up the river with logging up north. All along the St. Croix was white pine, some along Wolf Creek, along Trade River, and all these other branches on up through. And so there was a lot of supplies coming, and there was nobody farming or anything up here, so there was no real produce up here except what they could trade, fish or deer or something with the Indians, the logging camps. So they brought their supplies up to St. Croix Falls, had to get off the river because of the falls and the rapids, and then came up the road through here. And so by the 1850s, there were people starting to say, oh, these people are coming up all the time and back. We can make some money by having an overnight stop. And so Wolf Creek in 1854, a guy named Samuel Deneen, I got pictures of him. I'm moving ahead here, so I'm going to, since I'm doing Wolf Creek right now, let's go back and see if this, yep, I got that one too. So let's take, oh, by the way, as long as we're still talking about Indians, let me see here. This is St. Croix Falls down here. We're coming up, this is the River Road branched off, and a little ways down there, there was something called the Spirit Stone that the Indians left offerings on. It's still there, although somebody moved it up into a yard down there. This is a friend of mine, and his wife, about 20 years ago, by it. It was just a stone that when they widened the river road, they moved it, the guy had it moved up into his yard. But so that was part of it. There's also, if you go a little further up the road, right here, Spangler's Landing here, but we're going to do Indians yet. Oh, that's the wrong one. Let's see here. An Indian burial site. Okay. Now, why I know some of this stuff about the river is my grandpa lived just down the river. Some of you know where Dwayne Larson lived. That was my grandpa's place. Well, it was just down a few miles down the river, south of Nevers Dam, I guess that would be. I can't remember. It was near Nevers Dam. And Grandpa lived down there on the side of the river. His brother lived just a little bit up the hill. His nephew lived, they all had farms along that area down there. So Grandpa lived in there through the, I think the 30s and 40s. In the late 30s, he and Grandma ran the Wolf Creek store, and into the early 40s. But then they had this place down on the river. So one of the neighboring people here in this area, you maybe remember, was named Joe Legou, and his daughter, let's see, that was Louise?
Big granddaughter Louise.
Great granddaughter, yeah, okay. One of the people that started our group was Louise Legou, went to school here with us. Anyway, he was a quarter Indian according to his daughter and according to his wedding thing. And he would come down every spring around Memorial Day and walk down to where my grandpa lived, and then walk down the ridge to the road that goes up the hill, which is like 211th. And there's a big point there. Now there's a brand new house up on there. But that was the Indian burial place. He said, my relatives are buried there. And so Margot and I, about 25 years ago, walked up there to see what it looked like. And he had one of these little wooden boxes that the Indians used to put over their graves with. And it was pretty well aged because Joe died a long time ago. But anyway, so that's an Indian burial site that I mentioned it to the park, or the Wild River people, it's on private land, and to the Indian tribe. And the Indian tribe people said, well, our ancestors are buried all over. You can't really say anything about any particular place, so we can't really pay attention to all of this. But anyway, there's a house down there, and I've been tempted to go in and ask him if they see any spirits or ghosts.
Glenn lives there on 211.
What?
Glenn lives on 211.
So this is if I get this right, you're going down River Road, and 211th goes up the hill, and there's a
211th, yeah.
yeah. Is that a dead end?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's the one. Anyway, Grandpa had owned that land along to the north of it. There's a point out there where the road goes south and goes up. There's a ravine, and then there's a nice point way up, and there's a house up there, and there were some fields up on there too. But that was where the where Grandpa said that Joe said that his ancestors were buried. So anyway, that's just so if you know who the people are that live there, you can. I suppose while I'm at
Make
it,
a visit.
across the road from the Indian burial site, and
When you get to the
nearby.
top of the hill, you get to the top of the hill there. If you go north, that's where Glenn lives, in the woods.
Well, this one has to have a driveway coming up the hillside from the River Road, quite long, gentle driveway, I think.
That'd be further south.
I think, I don't know, it's on the northeast of River Road and 211th. There's a big point way up there. It's in the woods, okay, but there's a new house up there now. I'll talk to you later, okay? But anyway, okay, so right across the road from there was a family, a man and a woman farmers, Peter and Anna Andersky. You probably remember Andersky. And she listened to the spirits. She knew that they were telling her there was treasure buried on her property along the river there. And so whenever they got a little extra money ahead, they would hire somebody to come in with a backhoe. This is in the 40s and 50s, and dig for treasure. And Grandpa said, well, they never found anything. They thought they just hadn't looked the right place. So I thought maybe they were overlapping with some of the spirits just across the road from the Indian tribe. By the way, also, as long as we're doing Indians, at Nevers Dam, where that was, there's some flat land along the river there. It's now not as much of it because the dam in St Croix Falls backs up water there, but there was some flatlands, and they said every year that was where the local Indians gathered to have their dances and everything at that flat area. But okay, so we we missed our Indians here. There's another farm there, a guy named Joe Arnell, later his son Martin owned it. He was from Germany, and he had lost a leg in a, I believe it was a logging accident, they said, but everybody along the road there said, well, that was a haunted house. He had died in '39, and so the house had gotten empty, and it was deteriorating and everything, and so my brothers and I thought, well, we should go over there, and some of the other neighbors told us, well, you know, if you go in there and you'll hear that wooden leg stomping around, and you gotta be careful. so we didn't actually go there. But,
It worked.
I guess it did, yeah. Okay, so let's jump into down at St Croix Falls. Okay. One of the guys who was really early in this area, he had a trading post across the river up here at Sunrise. You know where the Sunrise Ferry is, and then across the river, he had a trading post in the 1840s. Later, another guy, get his name, Holmes, William Holmes, or Holmes Lake is named after, took over the trading post. But this guy was a very interesting fellow. Early 1840s, he was here. He was a Jewish person, which was rare in this area. Came from a pretty rich family in England, although he didn't have a lot of the money. It was a large family. And he had Folsom, in this book he wrote on the St. Croix River Valley, said, well, in some 1846 or something, I was coming up river, and he had the trading post there, and he was married to an Indian woman. And at the time, there weren't very many women in the area, so a lot of the early traders married Indians. Anyway, including this Samuel Brown that founded Wolf Creek. Samuel Brown, no, Joseph Renshaw Brown. Anyway, so he said, well, you know, I'm Jewish, and he said there's a theory going around that actually still some people accept, is that the Indians in America are really the lost tribes of Israel. So he said, I'm marrying in the faith. So he said that was okay. That was okay. That actually is a belief that Mormons have had. I think they still do. They thought that somehow or other they were lost tribes of Israel. So what was interesting about him was he bragged one time. He had a trading post right on the north end of St. Croix Falls too, and a dance hall, a bowling alley, and sort of one of the very early people in the thing. And he bragged that I should get, this is during 1860s, there was an Indian massacre out in Minnesota, out in central Minnesota, and killed a lot of people, and so right during the Civil War, and so they had sent a bunch of troops out there, including one of our local guys, Charles Nick, was in that group, and went out there, and he said, well, I should get a medal, because he said the amount of Indians that have died from the liquor I've sold them is probably more than in that massacre. But that sounds pretty bad. But at the same time, when the Civil War came out, he decided that it was time to join up. So he recruited 100 people along the St. Croix River from up here, including the Hoovers and people in St. Croix Falls, all the way down to Prescott, equipped them, paid for their stuff and everything, took them off down to Madison, where they called themselves the St. Croix Rifles. They were Company F of the 1st Infantry in the Civil War, and they were in for the whole war pretty much. And he was elected their captain. His great-great-granddaughter sent me that picture last week, because I said I wanted to have a picture of him. And his place north of town, he and Sylvester Partridge ran that, because he also had a trading post over at Balsam Lake and a shingle mill and stuff. Anyway, they called it Quail Town because the one guy's name was Partridge. But there was a dance hall, and you could go there, and they said that the description was it's lots of pretty Indian maidens were there, and so the people working in St. Croix and the mills and stuff could go over and dance and that. But yeah, very interesting guy, because there are both really heroic type things, pioneer type things, as well as some pretty terrible things. He had married this Indian woman, and so the thought was he left for the Civil War, abandoned his wife and like 5 kids in St Croix Falls, and went off for the war, and just left it. And so the lady, her name is Kathy Red, from Florida, sent me a bunch of his letters home from the Civil War, because they had kept all this stuff. And one of them said, well, I'm sending $20 to, because his wife died from tuberculosis not so long, well, somewhere in there. She was quite sick when he left. So I'm sending $20 to these people who are taking care of my daughter, plus another 5. Can you send her a picture to me? I have my 14-year-old son with me down here in Tennessee, where he was at that, and so it's questionable whether he really abandoned his family and all that stuff. Sounds like he was trying to take care of them. So okay, so we'll leave St. Croix Falls, and let's take some of the along the road. Spangler's Landing. Okay. By the way, this is a map that's online, and if you click these dots, then you can see, it doesn't come up here on the screen, but they zoom up, and you can read this stuff. For some reason I'm in the, I'm in the wrong view. I'm in the editor's view. I gotta go into the people's here. So, Spangler's Landing. Okay, that's just a little bit north of Grantsburg, of Lions Club Park. So, if you want to know what Spangler's house was, a guy by the name of England, whose family settled out at the mouth of Trade River, which the local folks always called England Bay, because that was the England family, although they changed it to Angling Bay, but England was there. He wrote this about it, so he says, he had gone to St. Croix Falls on a nice winter day to pick up like a sack of flour or something, hauled all the way back to where Trade River comes into St. Croix, which is like 12, 14 miles. And so he said, my forenoon tramp and my sled dragged heavily, and I can't read that, but my ear was frozen, and in attempting to thaw it with snow, I froze my finger, so the ear had to freeze while I took care of the hand. Next I got cramps in my legs, sat down to rest. Here a young man named Jacob Hagee, who was actually from up by Grantsburg area, also afoot, overtook me and advised me to get up and go on. I got up and followed him, but could not keep up. However, I managed to reach Spangler's, and then the only habitation between St. Croix Falls and Nevers had a house. Dan wasn't there yet, but he had a house there, which was 11 miles from town and 4 miles beyond Spangler's. Here, young Hagee was warming up, but shortly departed. I learned later, after going some miles beyond Wolf Creek, he lost the road in the storm, but saved his life by walking around a tree all night. I sat down by the stove at Spangler's. I began to realize how near I had come to perishing. I got the shaking of my life. For over an hour, my muscles twitched and jerked me beyond all control. Spangler's lived in a board shanty with open cracks between the boards, and that night when the fire went out, the cold came in. They gave me a small piece of blanket, all they could spare, and I curled up on it. And he goes on to tell, that's one of the books we have out here in our museum, his stories of this. So that sounds pretty bad. However, the Spanglers prospered and built a new house, this one, which is not actually down on the river now. It was down there, but when they put in the dam down at St. Croix or somewhere along the line, they had to move it, and so they moved it up the hill, and it was up there. This is a picture of it, but there's still some of the Spangler relatives around the area.
The house isn't there though, is it?
No, this is gone, but it's pretty impressive house. Joseph Spangler was from Germany, and if you know Taylor's Falls, the library in there was his tailor shop. He had moved down. He moved. I don't remember which order it was, but he was a tailor, so he had moved down there and built that little bitty house, and that was his library. That's the current library, and where his house was. And they have some information on him down there. Some of you may remember Otto Spangler used to have in the parades his old 1903 Cadillac or something like that. Okay, so let's go back here. So that's Spangler. I suppose we should jump to Nevers because Nevers is, I'm running short on my time here. All right, let's go back here. Nevers has got a named place, and so, you know, in the, those of you who know the logging era, at St Croix Falls, it was not only the falls, but these angling rocks and everything. The logs coming down would always jam up and make mess down there, and they had trouble with it. So Isaac Staples and some of these other people that were big loggers from Stillwater decided the answer would be a dam upriver, and they put it right down here at the head of the rapids, near just about where Wolf Creek was in, sort of in that area. So they built this dam in like the 1888, 89, 90, and used it for logging until about 1914, when the last of the logs came through. They didn't have any more to cut. And what it was for, and I'll give you a real graphic thing. Think of these logs, and then think of the place they got to go through these curls down there at St. Croix. And so if you open this dam, it's sort of like moving the lever, the water would flush down through and the logs would happily go on down Stillwater, rather than get you get my image there? That was the whole idea of it. And so they would flush it. Well, by 1914, there was a dam in St. Croix, about 1907 or 8 or 9, somewhere in there, for power. And they still had to run logs through. But when the logs were finished, then this got used for decades as about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they would open up the gates, let a flush of water go down through, get a lot of electricity produced about 5 o'clock till 7 o'clock at night when everybody came home, because their lines went to the Twin Cities from the power plant, the Northern States one. And then they would get electricity, then they'd close it up again. And above it was a big fishing area. So when you go down the road here south of Wolf Creek, there's a few little, by Riverside Autos, there's a few little bitty cabins along the road. Those were sort of the fisherman's place. And that big swamp area down that looks like just brush, where you can't see the river, that was sort of flowage up there. So it was quite a popular fishing area. In it many times got warped. It was all wood, and it was stuck in place in the sand by posts driven down into the sand, and big piles of rocks that were held in place, and which is not some of us remember our Sunday school, the foolish man built his house on the sand, was it, or something like that? Well, anyway, that was a little bit of a problem keeping it going, and so they had to keep repairing it. And by the mid-40s, they were really not using it, had kind of warped open. And in spring of 1954, my uncle, I was saying my family lived down in that area. My uncle came over and picked up my brothers and I and said, the dam is supposed to wash out. Why don't we go down and take a look at it? So we went down and sat on the hillside. It was all open, kind of mowed up. It was all really quite nice area. And we watched the water go over it for maybe an hour or so, and decided that maybe it wasn't going to go out while we were watching. So then it went out over that night. And then so the next day my uncle came and we got to come down and take a look at it. And what I remember is a chunk of it, like maybe one of these sections like that had broken completely loose and was down maybe 100 yards or more down the river, from where the dam was. Then, so they realized they weren't going to ever use it or rebuild it. So then they hired a bunch of people and dismantled it all. My uncle worked on the dismantling crew. And he took some of these huge white pine timbers and sawed them into lumber and built a house out of it. It's I believe the bottom part of Jeanette DeRouche's house was built out of this. Because that was the one my uncle built, and then they moved it over and put a top on it. But so, and okay, I should have told you, Charlie Nevers lived here. Before, there's another picture of the dam. There was a bridge across. You could cross the St Croix River here. Before Nevers was here, back in the 1850s, a guy named Henry Harrison Bush had a hotel and trading place on the Minnesota side, because people might go up the Wisconsin side or go up the Minnesota side, and this area here was shallow enough where Wolf Creek went in that they would cross on this, and sometimes they had a ferry there, and sometimes they'd go across with the horses. So this was a sort of a natural place already for people staying. And so Charlie Nevers had the land on the Wisconsin side right here, a house and everything, and then he farmed some of that lowlands. It wasn't flooded. And then when big lumbermen decided to build the dam, they bought up his place, but they called it Nevers Dam because it was where the Nevers place was. And then they had to buy up more land along the river all the way up through pretty much to Burnett County, because they were going to flood that area. And so that's why in the 70s, Northern States Power Company still owned the shorelines of St. Croix on both sides, and why it was able to, hadn't been developed, and why it was able to be turned over to be a scenic and wild river area. About all that's left of Nevers Dam, this is still down there, just a little bit north of the entryway, is, can you guess what that might be? Yeah, it's like a root cellar.
Yeah.
It was, it's heavy concrete that had been covered with dirt. It's kind of washed away. Last time I was in there, it looked more like it had been used for a meth cooking spot. But I wouldn't know for sure.
What was it? A spring house.
Yeah, we were just down there the other day, there's a big iron pipe, it looked like it had that, when it tipped over, but it looked like it had that set up for the spring water to come up.
Okay, yeah.
Did they store potatoes in there?
Well, they would have stored whatever that they needed. In the winter, it doesn't a problem, but in the summer, you needed someplace cool for your stuff. Because Nevers Dam was built in 1888, 90 or so, and then had a crew there for running logs through. When they built it, they had a large crew, and so Wolf Creek really boomed. They got 2 stores, blacksmith, church was built in 1895, school was already here, but anyway, there was a hall, and there was a mill. This guy, Samuel Deneen, which I jumped ahead, in 1854 put the first dam on the river out here. You can still see the berms if you look upstream from the bridge down here where the dam was. And he had a mill where he did sawing lumber, grinding corn or whatever. They always said he was an actual doctor, came from Michigan, and he was a full service doctor because he took care of you while you were pregnant, helped with the birth if it needed be, helped with raising the kid, was also a lay minister at they used the school for church, and might preach the christening or whatever you would say, the baptism or something, and the marriage would have been done by him, And when you got sick, he took care of you. And when you died, he had donated this land here for the cemetery. That was his donation too. And he had the lumber to build, and was a carpenter, built your coffin, and said the service, and dug the hole and buried you. So I was going to say, that's what you call a full service doctor.
He must have been a busy guy.
Yeah.
Well, he was a pretty interesting fellow because he lived to be around 90, and his wife did, and they lived right here in Wolf Creek, and they were the first ones here. Both of them, I should say, he and a friend of his, younger man, came from, oh, and by the way, they're all buried over here in the cemetery, came from Sterling Township, Macomb County, Michigan, over to here. So that's some hint of where maybe the name Sterling might have come from. The original name, before they became a township, was called Moscow Township. And that comes from the Indian word for prairie. By the way, the Sand Barrens wasn't woods. It was open prairie that burned all the time with trees along Trade River and Wolf Creek and St Croix River. It was open, and the Indian word for prairie is like Moscow Ting Ding or Moscow Ting, and so we translated it as flower-covered prairie is what that name was originally. It doesn't look like prairie anymore, but that's because fire control came in. Okay, so we got 4 minutes. I was going to say, let's see here. I want to go back and so what you need to do, if you're interested, is you get this link. Now, how many of you have internet? Yeah? Well, if you look at, if you got the newsletter from our group, it has links in there to get you to this. But I guess I can, well, anyway, I don't have it in front of me. But, so let's go down and take one more person. Okay, how about the Sunrise Ferry? Do you all know where that is?
Yes.
And there's a road that goes, Evergreen Avenue goes way out west. Then you take a left out at the schoolhouse. That's where my mother went to school. And you go south, and then you take a winding road that goes clear down to the river, and that's where the Sunrise Ferry was. And at the time, there was a school there. Hugh Blair sent this picture to Mom. It was out on the school, log schoolhouse that was out at the Sunrise Ferry. They called it the Ferry School. Later they moved it up to where the Evergreen School is by the logs, and then they built a new one in about 1914. But this is 1907, and this is out there on the river. My grandmother's family came from Iowa, the Carneses, up here around the turn of the century, because Baker Land and Title, that's a big land agency, advertised all this wonderful farmland for sale, flat, developed houses, and it was out on the Sand Barrens, and so they all got sucked in thinking it was more Iowa dirt, and so about 8 or 9 families from Iowa, Bernizers, Carneses, Mortensen, I can't think of them all, but all kind of came up over a Mishler over this early 1900s and settled on Barrens. And you could still homestead out there because it was so poor nobody had wanted to homestead it. So 3 of my great uncles each homesteaded 160, and then my great grandpa bought, he had some money, so he bought his 160. So the 4 of them had 640 acres together, just near where that horse camp is out there, just south of that. Eventually they sold it to the town of Sterling.
Not
So
good for vermin, I gather?
well, it is if you, okay. The
Like
people that,
sanders.
yeah, the people that came in, it was sand, okay, there's sand, just plain poor sand, and there was probably maybe 6, 8 inches of topsoil on top that this prairie over 10,000 years had built up. And when they farmed that, originally they farmed wheat out there because it was easy to plow, quick to go, and soon wore that out, blew, and so it was really quite, so by the 1890s, everybody that had been out there pretty much had given up. There was another influx during the Great Depression in the 30s because people lost their places, and here were these homes still out there sitting unoccupied, and the land, now nobody paying the taxes, so you could go out and squat, or you could pay the county $1 an acre for it, and then you could live out there. And so quite a few people did that, but by the time World War I came along and things got more prosperous, it pretty much emptied out again, and now it's back filled up again with people. There are quite a few people live out there, aren't there, Steve? Wilson is the town chairman of Sterling for another few months. 2 more months. Then he's going to retire. But so if you guys are looking for a job, Steve has a good job. And before him, another guy, can't think of his name now. Tom Schweitzer, yeah, had done it for like 25 years or something. So yeah, township government's quite interesting. So anyway, Grandma and her brother, who had come back from the Philippines with bad health in 1909, took over the ferry that summer and ran it. Her brother died, and then the rest of the Carnes family decided, well, there wasn't much going on out there at the time. Maybe if we ran the ferry, we could make a living. And so they eventually bought up it was a cooperative ferry. They bought up the shares, built a new ferry, and ran it until, I think in the early 40s, it had a spring flood and it went downriver and got so far out they couldn't get it back, and there wasn't much traffic anymore. So they just gave it up. But let's see if I got it. No, I don't have another picture of that. So I think that's about all. If you actually look at this map, you would see things like out on Trade River, the Sterling Fire Tower, Maidman Meadows. The summer of 1970, I was the Sterling Tower man. Climb up that 100-foot tower, look for smoke all day long, and then climb back down if there was no smoke. And I spent the whole summer doing that, and all I ever saw was the Wolf Creek dump, and the Rush City, Minnesota dump, and the Grantsburg dump. That's the only smoke. I was pretty bored. But it was kind of nice to see everything. Let's see here. There's a lot of these. I'll go over here. I guess I could just these are some of the lists of some of the things that are on the map. The trading posts. Holmes had a trading post over on Sunrise. Holmes Lake is named after him. He also had married an Indian woman, and the Holmes family there's still a lot of them around. Lagoo Creek in the site of Grandpa's sawmill. Now I gotta get rid of this here. Anyway, this idea of having maps like this is a pretty interesting way to provide. You could take tours, and so I was going to show you before I go. These are all accessible to the public. They're all so. Let me go here.
So this weekend, when it gets really cold now, you can get on this map where it's still fresh in your
I'm trying
mind.
to see my.
You can
where the heck is
continue your own
maps
history thing.
There it is. Okay.
'Cause it's
So-
pretty interesting.
The maps I've made recently, here's 1873 Polk County mail routes. So, because in 1873 the newspaper published, here are the mail routes, starts at Stillwater, came up to Star Prairie, Osceola, St Croix Falls, and then 2 branched off from St Croix Falls and that. So each one of these has, if you click them, like Wolf Creek has some information about the Wolf Creek post office.
Oh, cool. The Alabama
These
one
are-
is on there too,
yeah.
huh?
So now, let me go back here. And Atlas, the area around Atlas, the trail from St. Paul to Superior, if you follow that, there's a group doing a auto tour route on this. So these are the stops that were along the way. Let me go back here. And each one you can put stuff behind it. Here is all of the, in 1980s, in the county museum and volunteers made approximately 400 markers and put out here and there all around, historic markers around. A few of them are left, a lot of them are gone. Okay, this is a map of where every one of them was and what was there. So for instance, if we rolled up here north of St Croix Falls, I haven't put anything behind most of these. We just did the markers. So like here is the second Wolf Creek School. Now I can put a picture of it because I have a picture of that. 1882. That's this building. It's actually not really the second. It's probably the fourth Wolf Creek School. But and I did one for a talk on the Trade River Valley. So if you want to see where the dams were on Trade River, where there were interesting stops or something, you can like, you went up to Atlas, let's see, there's Trade Lake, Trade River, Four Corners, well let's take here. So Trade Lake, the Carlson store, stuff like that. So, okay, so this is it. Yeah, now you can ask any questions if you want to.
Where do we find those maps again?
They're on the internet, and you send an email. Do you do email? You send an email to River Road Rambler at gmail.com, and I'll send you the link.
Okay.
So now you try to remember that, River Road Rambler. Just exactly like it's spelled. Yeah.
Was a trading post in St Croix Falls by the Jewish men, Jerusalem Pond area?
No, that's a different place. The Blandings were up there. Actually, he owned some land up there early on, but that was, I don't think he had a trading post there. I think the only one he had in St. Croix was down pretty close to the river on the north end of town. Maybe, I'm not absolutely sure.
I just thought it sounded like a Jewish person would have named that Jerusalem Pond.
Yeah, actually see, if you look at the really early land records, he did own land up there, so he could have named it that. I mean, later the Blanding family kind of took over that area, but he was there earlier. And he had in Balsam Lake, he had a shingle mill. They had to put a dam on a stream that comes out of Balsam Lake. There's a dam there yet. And he built a house that's still there. It's the oldest house in Balsam Lake. It's kind of behind the county museum back in there. I knew the lady who lived there. She passed away a few years ago, but that was also his place. Some of these people were all over the place. They saw opportunity. His dad died in 1850 in England. His mother had a lot of money, and he had several siblings who were all quite prosperous, and he was too. And when his mother died in about 1870, a little after the war, she had several thousand acres of land up in this area that they had speculated on too. Some of it over in Minnesota, over by Lindstrom and that, and some here. And so he was trying to get cash out of it for the people to do that. But yeah, these are fascinating folks, I think, because they're flawed. All right.
But
So
brave. Thank you.
now there's some desserts here and stuff, so you can have some of that.
Thank you, Russ.